Are you feeling defeated from your summer garden? Whether it was pest problems that took over your plants, or the extremely hot temperatures we had this summer, or maybe it was that your plants actually produced really well, but you just couldn't keep up with the harvest. There's a lot that comes along with the summer garden, and by the end of the season, it's exhausting. If you're feeling exhausted, I am right there with you. But I want to encourage you to plant a fall garden because it is your second chance at a more productive and more enjoyable garden. Hey there, welcome to another episode of the Audrey's Little Farm Show. If this is our first time meeting, my name is Audrey Crawford and I am a Central Valley, California gardener in Zone 9. So I'm super excited for today's show because I'm going to be diving deep into the topic of fall gardening, which is my favorite season of the year. And I'm also going to be sharing some truths that a lot of gardeners just don't talk about. So let's jump into today's episode. But first, if you are listening to this in real time, I'm getting ready to host the Fall Vegetable Gardening Summit, which is a free 4-day online event completely dedicated to helping you grow your best fall garden yet. And so if you just head to the link in the description, you can sign up for your free ticket. Okay, so I am sure that you can agree with me on this, but by this point in the season, I am exhausted from my summer garden. We have had a really hot summer, and I am just tired of being out in the garden. I hate to say that, but it's just been an exhausting summer. It's been really hot, and it's just not enjoyable being out in the garden when it's this hot, especially when we have 100+ degree days for days on end. And so there are lots of plants right now that need to be harvested that I just haven't got around to. There are lots of weeds that need to be pulled, just lots of cleanup. My garden looks a little bit like a jungle. I'm very happy with how my plants have grown this year. I've had some really incredible harvest from lots of plants, especially my tomatoes. My tomatoes have done really good this year, but going out to the garden every day and keeping up with all the harvesting has been exhausting. And so if you're feeling that way too, I just want you to know, first of all, you're not alone. And the other problem with the summer garden is that a lot of the crops grow really fast. So for example, if you don't go out there and harvest every day or every other day, a lot of the crops are just way too big to even enjoy. For example, my okra, I went a few days without harvesting, and now they're all way too big to even enjoy. Same thing with some zucchinis and cucumbers, and so you wait so long for these harvests, but then if you don't stay on top of it, they quickly go past the ideal size. So that's kind of the struggle with the summer garden. And I can totally understand if right now you're wanting to just wrap up your summer garden and take a break until next spring. However, I want to encourage you to not do that because the fall garden season is truly the most enjoyable season of the year, and it's so much easier. There are less pest and disease issues. There are more crops that you can grow. It seems like there's a lot of things you can grow in the summer, but you can pretty much multiply that by 3 or 4 times in the cooler months. And if you live in a hot climate, the fall and winter season is actually the most productive season of the year. And so I want to encourage you to either improve your fall gardening skills if you've tried it in the past and haven't had success, or plant a fall garden for the first time. So if you are a gardener who lives in a mild winter climate, meaning that you're not covered in snow throughout the entire winter, that you don't experience hard frost for multiple days in a row, but you just maybe occasionally experience a light frost, maybe even occasionally a heavy frost, but then it kind of warms back up into the 40s and 50s, then you can grow pretty much every cool season vegetable all throughout the fall and winter and have great success. However, if you live somewhere that's covered in snow for most of the winter and you experience freezing temperatures for most of the winter, then you most likely are going to want to grow your cool season crops in late winter and early spring. But us here in Zone 9, fall is the best time to plant these crops. But like I mentioned, the summer crops are still likely going to be out in the garden. And so if you have space, you can grow both, or you're going to have to make the choice to rip out some of your summer plants to then make room for the cool season vegetables, or you can let your summer crops keep growing and maybe plant your cool season crops in containers or figure out a different way to implement them into the garden. The great thing is that in the cooler months, container gardens do much better. I don't really recommend a container garden during the summer if you live in a really hot climate because it's just way more difficult to keep those crops alive. The soil warms up much faster because it's in a container. The plants don't have as much space for the roots to grow, and it's a lot more difficult to have success in a container garden in the summer. But in the cooler months, a container garden is really easy. The weather is just cooler, so the crops thrive. They don't take as much water because the soil's not drying out as fast. And so if you still have things in the ground and you don't have room to plant your fall garden in the ground along with your summer garden, bring in some containers and you'll have success that way. So however you can make it all work, that's kind of your decision, something you have to plan out on your own. But I want to paint the picture of what a fall garden is like. So a fall garden is absolutely incredible because, first of all, the weather is cooler, so it's much more enjoyable to be out in the garden. There are so many things that you can grow. For example, you can grow all of your leafy greens, so lettuce, spinach, arugula, collards, things like that. You can grow peas, all of your root vegetables like onions, garlic, potatoes, rutabagas, turnips, carrots, radishes, parsnips. There's so many root vegetables that you can grow. You can grow broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, Brussels sprouts. So that in itself, I've counted on now multiple hands a few times. There's just so many vegetables to choose from. Whereas in the summer garden, there's really not that many things to grow. You can grow basically beans, corn, squash, eggplant, tomatoes, and peppers. I'm probably okra. I'm probably missing a couple things, but there's not that many warm season vegetables. However, the cool season crops are pretty much endless, and there is a lot of herbs that also grow really good in the cooler months. For example, cilantro and parsley are two really popular herbs that a lot of gardeners grow in the summertime, but they don't thrive in the summertime because they're actually a cool season herb. So your cilantro and parsley is going to thrive in the cooler temperatures, where during the summer it's probably something that you struggled with. And so there's just a lot of things to grow. And what I love about cooler season crops is that they're so much easier to harvest. So I don't know about you, but there are certain crops that I just despise going out to the garden to harvest. For example, green beans. Green beans take so long to harvest. It's fine if you just want to pick a few, but to actually harvest your entire plant, which is good for the plant because the more you harvest, the more productive your plants are, it's just exhausting. And I feel like I never have enough time to actually go out and harvest everything in its prime size. So, for example, pretty much with everything in the summer garden, if it gets too big, it's not as good. And so it's best to pick everything when it's smaller and less mature, but it's just time consuming to do that. And with cool crops, they don't grow as fast, and they're not as time consuming to harvest. For example, a head of broccoli, you just go out there with a knife and you cut off your head of broccoli. Same with your cabbage plant. You just pick that whole entire cabbage plant. There's no such thing as picking cabbage. You're just chopping off the entire cabbage right at the ground, and then you get to store it away or use it. The other thing is with your root crops, really simple to harvest. You just pull them out of the ground once they're mature, and you can even leave them in the ground usually for quite a while, especially if the weather is cooler, and the crops won't get that big that fast. So you kind of get to use your garden as a storage spot. Whereas once you pick something like a tomato or a cucumber, you have to use it pretty quickly, or it quickly loses its freshness. It doesn't taste as good, and it doesn't really store that well unless you do something to preserve it, like you did canned tomatoes or pickles or something like that. But with cool season crops, they last longer. Even once you pick them, they just have a much longer storage life, and you can leave them out in the garden longer, and they can kind of just maintain their ripeness and maturity in the garden without you having to worry about harvesting too quickly. So I know that you're probably wondering when exactly to plant your fall garden. And this answer kind of varies just depending on where you live exactly, but basically once the weather starts cooling off during the day and the nighttime temperatures cool off into the 50s and 60s, you're probably pretty safe to plant your fall vegetables. So like I mentioned, for us here in the Central Valley, we're probably pretty safe to plant from the end of August through the end of October. The sooner you plant means you're going to get a harvest a little bit sooner, but if you plant when it's still too hot, the weather could cause the crops to bolt prematurely. So you don't want to plant when it's still really hot, but you also don't want to wait midway into fall and when you could have got a harvest a little bit sooner. But also, don't worry about planting too late because when you live in a mild winter climate, those crops will overwinter. Even if they don't really grow much during the middle of winter, they will continue surviving and then they will pick back up in late winter, early spring. But it's always great to get a harvest sooner. So the sooner you can get your crops in the ground, the better. And some of the vegetables should be transplanted while others should be directly sown by seed. Basically, an easy way to think about it is all of your root crops that grow beneath the soil, so carrots, radishes, turnips, things like that, they should all be planted directly by seed. Your leafy greens, so your spinach, lettuce, arugula, things like that, they're all very easy to grow by seed, so that's always what I recommend is just direct sowing all of your leafy greens. But then things that grow above ground, like your broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, most of your brassicas, they will do better if you transplant them. You can plant them by seed as well, but they are really easy to transplant and they don't mind being transplanted. So if you can find them at a local nursery, you can go buy them as transplants, or you can get your own seed started. And I would do that as soon as possible. You can start getting all of your seeds started indoors and then transplant them out in the garden in about 4 to 6 weeks once the plants are about 4 to 6 inches tall. And so if you want to have this all-in-one download, I have a free gardening success guide that you can grab below. It is just a basic download and it shows all the various crops and what season they fall into, and then it tells the planting methods such as whether or not you should transplant them or direct sow them by seed. So you can grab that below. But then I also have a fall vegetable seed list of some of my favorite fall crops to grow. So you can grab that as well. They're two separate things, but they both serve a different purpose. So if you want to grab those, I'll link to both of them in the description. But I just want to encourage you to plant a fall garden. It is your second chance at a more productive and more enjoyable garden. Sometimes I forget that gardening is so enjoyable until I hit the fall season because everything changes. I enjoy being out in the garden again. The weather is cooler, which means you don't have to water as often. There are less pest and disease problems, and you just end up keeping up on all the tasks because it's more enjoyable to be out in the garden. And so definitely consider growing a fall garden this season. And if you have not grabbed your ticket to the Fall Vegetable Gardening Summit, do that. I will have that link for you in the description. And I can't wait to see you in the next episode.